Hey y'all, welcome or welcome back. My name's Sarah. Coco is right here. Nope, I'm gonna mess that all up and probably tear something up. But she's right here, but she is like snoozing, so I wasn't gonna pick her up. She's here. Today we're gonna do scary, creepy stories that you should not watch alone. And I'm calling it that because the person that submitted these, they emailed them to me and asked to remain anonymous. So you know I ain't gonna say shit. Except thank you for sending them, because y'all, these are some good stories. This person, thank you. That they sent some good stories. And the subject of the email was scary, creepy stories you shouldn't watch alone. And I was like, ooh, I like the way that sounds, because I'm all about some scary stuff. I'm not easily scared unless I'm watching The Conjuring by myself while Gavin's at work. And then, if y'all want to hear that story, go watch the cliche Get to Know Me 2021 video. Just skip to the part where I'm telling you about The Conjuring. It's worth it. We still laugh about it to this day. Let's get started. This story is called The Girl with the Glowing Red Eyes. Robin is a highly experienced nurse of many years standing. She has worked in many different aspects of nursing over the course of her career, including what is arguably the most challenging and heartbreaking field of them all, that of pediatric palliative nursing, taking care of dying children. It takes a very special sort of person to do that kind of work. As a paramedic, I've taken a number of children on what we call hospice transports over the years. The knowledge that the little one lying in front of you on the ambulance gurney is dying and will almost certainly never get to grow up or enjoy another Christmas is nothing short of gut-wrenching. For the EMT or paramedic, those calls only last for an hour or two at the most, and then we're on to the next emergency. All they do tend to keep you awake in the early hours of the morning. They are mercifully infrequent, and yet when they do come along, the dying children are the ones that stay with you forever. It must be much more difficult for the nurses and other end-of-life medical professionals who spend most of their time working, tending, caring for such patients. Although I'm not a religious man, I truly believe that people such as this are the closest thing we have to angels walking the earth in human form. I just can't comprehend how those compassionate men and women can deal with such heartbreak every day, day in and day out, and still remain centered and even upbeat. My hat goes off to all the end-of-life caregivers who I have encountered during the course of my medical career. To me, every single one of them is a hero. In addition to being one of the finest nurses I know, Robin's also a very good friend of mine. I trust her word and her judgment completely and without question. As a gifted psychic medium and paranormal investigator, Robin has over 10 years investigating haunted locations with me, along with her husband Randy. She has produced some remarkable hits while on investigations and can always be relied upon to keep a level head when things turn dark and scary. Robin and I were sitting in a haunted jail cell late one evening just waiting around for something to happen, and I asked her what cases she was working on at the moment. She told me that she was currently a little preoccupied with something that was happening at her place of employment, a nursing facility for the elderly and those who could not take care of themselves. Her story, when she told it, was nothing short of terrifying. At the time these events occurred, Robin was working as a weekend nursing manager. One of her duties was to organize the schedule, making sure that the nursing home was staffed appropriately. And if that wasn't possible, she had to work the unfilled shifts herself. Unsurprisingly, the toughest shifts to fill were the overnight ones on the weekends. Not too many people will want to voluntarily work on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday nights. The facility housed somewhere around 60 residents, all of whom were taken care of by nurses and nurse aides. Robin arrived one night to work an overshift that she just hadn't been able to fill. She took a report from the nurse whose shift was ending. She told Robin that one of the patients who lived in a room at the end of the long hallway had been hallucinating fairly regularly that evening. This news didn't faze Robin particularly. The lady was in her 80s and suffered with dementia. Hallucinations are not uncommon in such instances. What was unusual was that the old lady had begun to growl at the nursing staff when they went in to attend to her needs. "Have you tried giving her a change of scene?" Robin asked. "Getting her out of that room and into a recliner in the common room might help her a little bit." "The aide wouldn't help me," the other nurse admitted, sounding a little embarrassed. "She said whatever is in there, she didn't want it coming home with her." Robin blinked in surprise. Whatever's in there? What a strange thing for a nursing professional to say. What exactly did she mean by that? The nurse told Robin that she and the nurse's aide believed the old woman was possessed. For her part, Robin was unconvinced, reasoning that the growling was more likely a worsening of her dementia symptoms. With shift relief complete, the evening shift staff left, leaving Robin in charge of the building. After making her rounds to check in on the patients, most of whom appeared to be sleeping soundly, she went back to the nurse's station and set about climbing the small mountain of administrative paperwork she had left to complete. It was close to 2 o'clock in the morning when she looked up from her desk. The sound of a loud, throaty growl echoed along one of the hallways, a deep and threatening rumble. She could tell it had come from inside the troubled old lady's room, audible even through the closed door. Instantly, Robin became convinced that this was something more than dementia. There was an inhuman quality to the growl that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. Nevertheless, she was a nurse and she had a patient to care for. It was that simple. Getting up from her chair, she made her way down the hallway toward the door at the far end. With every step she took, the growling seemed to get louder and more intense. Reaching out a hand, she twisted the handle and pushed the door open slowly. The room was completely dark. As she stepped inside, Robin was hit with an overwhelming sense of oppression and heaviness. Each step she took felt as if she were swimming underwater. The atmosphere in that room was nothing short of horrible, she said, afterward from the comfort of our jail cell that we were investigating. I've been a paranormal investigator for nearly a quarter of a century. It takes a lot to scare me, but I did not want to be in that room. It took everything I had not to turn around and leave that room immediately. As a paranormal investigator, she would certainly have been able to do that. Few would have faulted her for it. As a nurse, however, she did not. There was a patient in her care, and that meant she had a duty to provide care to her. The old lady was lying in bed, her head and shoulders propped up against a pile of pillows. She let out yet another loud growl, one that set Robin's teeth on edge like nails on a chalkboard. Using her most soothing tone of voice, Robin asked her gently what was wrong. "It's the girl." "Look, girl," Robin frowned. The old lady lifted a hand and pointed toward the floor. "The little girl with the red eyes. She's hiding under my bed." Squatting down, Robin looked underneath the bed. Finding it to be empty, she reassured her patient that there was nobody under there. But the woman was insistent. "The girl had red glowing eyes," she repeated, "and had crawled under the bed to hide when Robin entered the room." She gave a very detailed physical description of the girl, all the way down to the dress she was wearing. Robin went to fetch the nurse's aide, telling her that she needed a little help. Just as the evening shift aide had refused to go into the room, the same was true of her night shift counterpart. "What's got you so spooked?" Robin asked. "Is it the growling?" "She keeps talking about a girl with red eyes hiding in the room underneath her bed," the aide explained. That stopped Robin dead in her tracks. She knew from experience that the resident in question had very severe memory issues. It wasn't at all unusual for a nurse to go into her room, introduce herself by name, spend a minute or two administering some medications, and then have the old lady ask her what her name was again. She would forget things that quickly. Yet if the aide's story was correct, the resident had been telling the same story for the past few hours. Robin asked the aide to repeat the old lady's description of the red-eyed girl. It matched exactly with what she had just told Robin. This was unusually good recall for a patient who could barely remember anything for more than 2 or 3 minutes at a time. But the aide wasn't done yet. She said that the elderly resident was also seeing a headless woman in her room, standing in the corner and not moving. Robin went back to the resident's room with the very reluctant aide in tow. Just as the aide had said, she was now pointing to one of the dark corners, babbling about the lady with no head. Robin and the aide could see nobody back there, but both of them were afflicted by an extremely oppressive sensation from the moment they crossed the threshold. They tucked the old lady under her blankets and sat with her until she finally fell asleep. Robin ended up working several more days in a row. Over the course of the following week, she found that the memory-impaired resident kept telling her the exact same story. The red-eyed little girl under the bed and the headless woman in the corner of the room popped up again and again, and the details were always the same, perfectly consistent with what she had been saying all along. The little girl was nice at first, the old lady told Robin tearfully during one of her more lucid intervals. "But now she's gotten really mean. She's telling me to do things, bad things." "What's she telling you to do?" Robin asked gently, taking her hand. "She wants me to hit you, to hurt you." This didn't faze Robin too much. It is sadly quite common for patients such as this to lash out at their loved ones and caregivers. They aren't by any means bad or violent people by nature most of the time. It's just simply one of the side effects of their illness, one which often gets worse as their mental faculties decline. The medical staff at the facility did their best to treat this with medication, including the use of an antipsychotic named Haldol. Unfortunately, the medication did not have much of an effect on the growling lady, whose angry episodes only seemed to grow worse. One of the nursing staff pointed out that the patient, who was usually a very sweet and friendly woman, hadn't begun to growl and see phantom figures until after she had been moved into that specific room. After their trial of medication had failed, the patient's doctor tried every diagnostic test in their book in their attempts to try and diagnose the cause of her increasingly frequent hallucinations, including CT scans of her brain. Nothing obvious jumped out at them. Was her dementia simply worsening, or could there perhaps be another cause for this? One day, Robin was helping the troubled old lady take her medications. Suddenly, the patient's head snapped around to look at one corner of the room. Her tone became one of sheer panic. When Robin asked her what was wrong, the now absolutely terrified woman told her that they were back. "They?" Robin asked. "Who are they?" "The things." When pressed gently for more details, she went on to describe nightmarish creatures that were a cross between a spider and a human being. These spider things had been coming into her room for days now, she claimed, crawling up and down the walls. There were always 3 of them, no more, no less, and they quite understandably frightened the life out of her. Every once in a while, one of the creatures would scuttle across the floor to sit next to her bed, where it would claw at her with one of its appendages. As if this wasn't terrifying enough, the creatures then began to growl back at her, and in her words, they, quote, "told me to do such very bad things." The old lady could not even remember the name of her own daughter, Yet as the days passed, she continued to tell Robin and the other nurses the exact same story over and over again, always with perfect consistency. It's no wonder that they began to get scared when they were around her, eyeing the walls of her room warily. A short while later, Robin noticed that the nature of her patient's growls was starting to change. It was almost as if there were two different voices growling in tandem, competing for supremacy. Neither one sounded as if it could possibly have emanated from such a frail and delicate voice box. There was definitely a masculine quality to each one. Thankfully, she was living in a single bedroom, so there was no possibility of putting a roommate in there with her. One can only imagine how stressful and downright frightening it would have been to have shared a room with her. No matter how hard she tried, Robin was unable to calm her patient down in the slightest, let alone get her to stop growling. The nurse aide flatly refused to go into the room anymore, something for which Robin could hardly blame her. It felt as if, rather than a sweet little old lady, they were being confronted by an animal, or something worse. Finally, at a complete loss as for what to do, she stepped outside and phoned her husband, Randy, a fellow paranormal investigator. She tells her husband, "I don't know where he is, but can you please track down Stephen and ask him to pray for us?" Stephen was also a paranormal investigator, one who just so happened to be a priest who specialized in handling those cases that were darker and more malevolent than the standard everyday type of hauntings. If anybody could help out, even from a distance, it would be him. With her request made, Robin went back inside and stood just outside the patient's doorway. Closing her eyes, she began to pray quietly, focusing on the fervent hope that her patient be granted some measure of respite from whatever force it was, whether medical, paranormal, or some degree, or both, that afflicted her. Unbeknownst to Robin, her husband had managed to reach Stephen in a very timely manner. The priest immediately began to offer up prayers for Robin and her patient from his home in the mountains, while she did the very same thing from right outside the patient's door. Their combined efforts appear to have worked, and worked quickly. Almost as if a switch had been flipped, the old woman stopped growling and flopped backward onto her pillows. As she looked at Robin, her expression changed from a malicious scowl to one of warmth and friendliness. "Hi, honey," she said with a smile. "Can I please have some hot chocolate?" Robin blinked, taken aback. It appeared as though she was looking at a completely different person than she had been just a few seconds ago. Every last ounce of aggression had suddenly melted away, leaving the kindly old lady once more in its place. At the time of this story, she's doing a little better. The episodes of growling are fewer and farther between, as are the visits from the spider people she claims to have seen. But even though things are calming down somewhat, as far as this particular patient is concerned, there are other reports of paranormal activity at this same nursing home. Staff have heard themselves called out to at night when working alone in the offices, when nobody else is around or awake. For instance, lights appear to have taken on a life of their own, flickering far beyond what would seem reasonable for even the oldest of wiring, and even switching themselves off and on when the mood takes them. Most of these lights are controlled by motion sensors, which means that something tangible must trigger them in order to turn the lights on, even when there is nobody up and about. Robin has learned to deal with these shenanigans by telling the culprit to knock it off, which usually happens. When she leaves the office building in order to tend to her duties and then returns later on, the doors leading to the conference room like to open themselves up of their own accord. This somehow manages to take place without any motion sensor activated lights being triggered, which would be impossible if a living, breathing, flesh and blood person was responsible. Finally, she decided to mention it to her boss, who said, "Yeah, we've noticed that too. We just don't like to talk about it." I would not want to work in that nursing home. No. That concludes part 1 of our scary, creepy stories you shouldn't watch alone. Part 2 will be coming up next. Let me know your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe and like. And leave me a comment. Submit more stories. I love them. Especially when they're good and creepy. Or let me know if you have any true crime ideas that you want me to do. Whether they be the short version or the long version. Or if you have a question about addiction, let me know that too. Thank you for watching. I'll see y'all in the next video.